Okay, so we're going to start with the first demo is a two-way stop with one guard. So you'll see our guard waiting on the other side of the school. The students will walk up and cross with him to join the students that were already at his corner. He goes out into the school zone and crosses the students until they get to the campus. That is what we would call an L crossing, because you're crossing in the shape of an L.
Okay. And I think did you have any other comments before we move to the next scenario, or do we have any questions? I don't see any questions yet. Okay.
So, you know, it's all about the setup. As long as you are putting your portables in the right spot, that will help you operate the zone. And then when you're crossing, just being aware of your placement in the corner and following that proper L pattern, you should be able to cross your kids safely.
Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the next scenario and make sure that the interaction is just as awkward as it is in person. So we're doing our best to not step on each other. So thank you for bearing with us. So this next scenario is very similar to the first. The only difference, the main difference, is it's at a four-way stop where you've got the white crosswalks and you don't have the yellow crosswalk at all. So in this setup, we've got the school on the upper right-hand corner. That's where our guard is waiting. In this scenario, let's assume that there's a lot of kids that come from some of the other corners too, and that's why the guard is chosen to be at this corner in the morning. The setup is in the morning. So we already have kids on the upper left-hand corner. So that guard is going to head and cross those students first, and then return to the original corner, and then make a separate crossing, and of course wait for traffic to clear, looking left, right, left before walking into the street. Cross the kids over to the corner across from the school, and finally one more crossing to get the kids back to the school property, and then the guard will return to the original corner. One thing I want to point out about this in this scenario, savvy crossing guards may say, well, why didn't that crossing guard just make two crossings? Just cross what would be that upper crosswalk and then cross the crosswalk on the left to get those kids across over and only make two crossings. And my response to that would be, well, in this particular scenario, only 3 of the crosswalks are painted. So that means the school and or city want those crosswalks to be used. However, it may be that was more appropriate many years ago, and maybe it's not today. So this is a great example of something that we would encourage you. If you see something out there, the signs markings, you think maybe it doesn't make sense for today, or you have a better idea, share that with your principal. Have your principal contact the appropriate city's transportation or traffic engineering group, and we can evaluate that, because maybe that was done many years ago and it's just not appropriate today. Maybe it does make more sense for that other crosswalk to be marked instead of one of the others. Maybe not. It also depends on how many kids come from the other corners as well. So it's just something that would be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
And another point that I've noticed in this demo is the direction that the guard is facing. We get a lot of questions and comments about which direction should I be facing in the crosswalk. And a lot of times it just comes down to wherever you have the majority of traffic coming towards you, that's the direction you should be facing. So in this scenario, the guard felt that the traffic heading westbound was going to be heavier. So the guard in the demo faced in that direction. But if you feel that it's another direction, like if it's the opposite way, you would stand the opposite way. Later on in these demos, when we're talking about two guards, then you'll see how they work together facing the direction of traffic that's coming towards them.
And Don, we do have a question.
Okay.
Barbara asks, when you have the L crossing, should we have the traffic wait for both streets or one at a time? And she says, both kids and cars are anxious, so just to make the kids not jaywalk, or I treat it as two separate. So can you
Yeah, it
answer
should
that question?
be two separate because you don't want to delay cars any more than you have to. Um, so it's easier just for traffic flow and for safety and for, the agitation level that drivers get to, is to allow it to be two crossings.
Yeah, and the worst case scenario I've seen before, I think you've probably seen this before, is where a crossing guard walks out into the middle of a four-way stop intersection and holds everything up
Yeah.
and stops everything for kids to cross. And we don't want you to do that. It's just one
No,
crosswalk at a time.
no.
We have another question that's come in from Andrea or Andrea. When the crosswalk area was decided by a city, was there a process put into place? I'll start by answering this
Yeah.
saying depends. It depends on your city and it depends when. So generally speaking, there was typically some thought that went involved in where those crosswalks were marked. However, it depends on the city, it depends on the location and how long they've been there. So the history could be lost to the sands of time, but then again, both Don and I have been in our positions for many, many years. So we may have the history. May or may not be true at other cities. So the best guess would be just assume there was some thought that went into it, even if we don't know. But if you do have a question, just contact your principal and ask them if they share your concerns and if they want it to be evaluated by the city you're in.
Yeah, and when you are dealing with a four-way intersection like we're looking at now, crosswalks are typically installed along with the stop signs. So, it could have just been installed as just a feature to go along with the stop signs. But a lot of times, crossing can change over the years. So right now we've got these three crosswalks painted. Maybe it flips around and it's the other side that needs to be painted instead. So you never know. Always, if you see things, contact your administrator, have them contact the city that you're in, and they can evaluate and see if any changes need to happen for those locations.
Okay.
All right, let's go on to the next one, Margaret. So this is a demo of a two-way stop with two guards. So you see our two guards are on the opposite corners from each other. They're going to work separately first. So they're going to go out into separate white crosswalks, cross their whole groups of kids from those corners. Then they're going to come together in the final crossing and cross that last group and stop the traffic in the direction that they're facing. So that's the benefit of having guards, two guards work together in the same crosswalk, is you can work on just your half of the roadway. It's not always like that when you're a single guard. Do you have something to add to that, Brandon?
No, there's some points that they'll make for the next scenario with the all-way stop that are appropriate for this one as well.
Okay.
Although I will bring it up because this is an example with the yellow crosswalk. We have a question from Estrella, and the question is, our school signs are hit by traffic almost daily and we need to get new ones. It takes between 2 to 3 weeks to get them replaced. Why does it take so long? And I guess that also comes down to, once again, it depends on which city you're in.
Yes.
Most cities, it's up to the school or the school district to supply those portable signs. The
Right.
one exception is Phoenix, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so in Phoenix, it doesn't take normally 2 to 3 weeks. We try to do maybe a 1 to 2 day turnaround, because we know that it's vital that you have those signs, and it also doesn't allow police to do the enforcement properly if the signs aren't in place.
So the follow-up was that it's in Mesa. So
Yeah.
it does take time just to order the signs from whoever the sign vendor is. My best recommendation for that is if a district, especially a big district like Mesa, can have a few spares on hand, that can drastically reduce the wait times. In fact, certain locations, if you have portable signs that are getting hit all the time, you really want to have some spares on hand. That would be my recommendation. But it is up to the school to get those signs. But that's a recommendation I would suggest to help with that. And unfortunately, it's common at several locations where signs either get hit frequently or wander off from time to time. And I guess one point that we haven't made yet, I don't think we've really stressed it too much, is a good defense to protect those signs if they're chained up when not being used every day. A better defense is if you can remove them from the site and store them on the school campus somewhere. Obviously, it takes more work to do that, but your chance of those signs walking off is greatly reduced.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to put them behind the fence and lock them, you know, harder to get to.
Sure. Okay, can we move on to the next scenario, which is very similar. You'll see a pattern.
I'm sorry, Brandon, but did you have any, I see 2 or 1 right now in the Q&A. Was there a question regarding this scenario?
Yeah, well, there's another follow-up that just says, why can the signs be surrounded by the yellow metal around the rectangle so the cars that hit them will remember to be more careful? That's something, the signs that we use are actually standardized. There's a specific detail that says exactly what the sign's supposed to look like from the state, from Arizona Department of Transportation. But ultimately, sometimes it just comes down to if people hit, I mean, there's signs in the road, they do get hit. And if you're slowing down to 15 miles an hour already, you should be careful. So I don't really have a clean answer for that, but it's most likely not that people don't see the signs as much as maybe they're a little careless or just not so aware of their surroundings. So.
All right.
We're ready to move on?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, I was muted. Go ahead.
Okay, so the next scenario, we've got a 4-way stop with 2 crossing guards working in conjunction once again. So again, we've got three crosswalks painted, and there's a little something different in this one. So I'll point it out. So the guards work together in conjunction to get that one group of kids to cross and get over to school. Both guards return to their corners. So notice the guards are standing on the line of the crosswalk closest to approaching traffic. And then in this case, one guard has a group of kids, but the other doesn't. So only one guard goes out to stop traffic while the other one waits. And then to get that final group of kids back to school, the guards work in conjunction once again. So the thing I really want to point out about this is that in years past, we taught or stressed something a little bit different. We said that even if you don't have students to cross, both crossing guards would go out into the street at the same time. So we've had a lot of comments about that over the last, I think, 2 years. I would say several comments from crossing guards who said, you know, I was doing that exactly like you taught, and a police officer pulled over and said, don't do that. You're stopping traffic for no reason. You shouldn't be out there in the street if you're not crossing students. And the last thing we want to do is cause conflicts like that, where we put you as crossing guards in a difficult position where you're doing what we said, but you've got police officers telling you that maybe you should do something else. So we looked at it and said, you know, if you're really not crossing students, you're preventing vehicles from turning right and left that otherwise could turn without interrupting any crossings. So we decided to change our recommendations in this case and say, if you don't have crossings, just stay on your corner, but work together. And as far as working together, one thing I wanted to stress is in the video, there's a really uncomfortably long scene where I'm standing on the corner, kind of talking, laughing, pointing. And what was happening is Dawn and I were at an intersection very similar to this in Phoenix. for the training, but we were acting as real crossing guards that morning, and it was a very busy crossing. And so what we were doing was actually coordinating with each other to figure out when we would both step out onto the street at the same time, because there was so much going on from every different direction. We were waiting for an appropriate gap, or in some cases we had to force a gap. So we wanted to make sure we were stepping out at the exact same time. So we're giving a clear indication to the motorists what we were going to be doing. And even before we stepped foot out into the street, we could raise our stop paddles to alert people, hey, we're gonna be walking out into the street. So that's really important that you work together closely with when you do have two guards at a location, so you don't have one walking out and then the other staggering behind. So communication is very important, and it's a lot to keep track of it, even at some of these locations with two guards, but it's really important that you do coordinate in that way. Did you have anything to add to this, Dawn?
There's a couple of districts in Phoenix that require their two guards to go out at the same time. Like you were talking about, one not going out when they don't have traffic. So if that's the situation in your district, if you want to let your administration know that the training advised you to only have one of you go out on the road, and you want to talk to me about it, just contact me, let me know, and I'll talk to them and talk to the district.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to bet that that's the district's practice, because that has been the actual recommendation from this training. So
Right.
To know our actual recommendation has changed, that very well may have an effect on what the district does moving forward too.
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
I think we're ready for the next one.
Okay, so now we are onto the demo with a signalized intersection with two crossing guards. So you see our guards, one's on the school side, one's across. They come out into the road together, facing their direction of traffic. Once it's clear, the kids slowly go into the roadway. There's a couple things about what happens with two guards at a signal. The second guard stops the turning. You saw that the car was waiting to turn left. That second guard controls and stops that. If that second guard wasn't there and that half of the road was clear, that driver could legally make that turn. So that's where the second guard is invaluable. And unfortunately, some districts don't feel the second guard is that important. If you feel you have issues at your school where you're the only guard at the signal and a second guard would be really helpful, let your administration know. And then hopefully they'll reach out to me or whoever, whatever city it is, and the transportation folks can work with them and try to show the importance of what a second guard can do.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack for this scenario at a traffic signal. There's just so many things going on, and we really realized that when we were doing the training videos. One of the other examples I wanted to give is has to do with that left turning vehicle, because we do have a lot of conflicts reported, and I've seen them over the years too. And even when I've kind of trained crossing guards serving as a crossing guard at a signalized location where the left turners want to turn while you're out there. The problem is when they can turn left, they can only turn left on a green light. But when they have a green light, it's also the walk signal for you to cross the street. So something that you can do, depending on how many kids you have waiting at your corner, is you can press that push button and just tell the kids, we're going to wait a cycle. We're going to wait for it to go through. That way it lets some of those cars flush out and gives them a little bit of relief. So that's one thing that you can do at your discretion that can help relieve some of the pressure. And sometimes just letting one group of cars go for one cycle can make a huge difference, and people will be more willing to be a little more patient. And another part I want to see, if we can play this scenario one more time. I want to highlight that left turner and what happens with the crossing guard that walks back to the street. So you can advance the crossing guard on the lower half, closer where the kids are right now. You're going to see that crossing guard get out of the street before the kids are out of the street, and then the car realistically would turn before the kids are completely out of the street. So what we're stressing there is two things. One, we know that you have limited time to get into and out of the street at a traffic signal. But the second part has to do with the law regarding white crosswalks that we're going to cover in the very next section. But as Dawn said, as long as one half of the crosswalk is clear of humans, of bodies, the car can actually make the turn. So that's, in a way, you're getting back to your corner just to get out of the street, but you're also letting those left turners, they have to make that left turn movement sometime. So by you getting out of the street, once the kids are out of your half of the crosswalk, that also takes a little pressure off and lets maybe a couple more cars make that turn. And often these are, a lot of times they're even parents that are trying to make that turn. So that's one more thing that you can do to get yourself out of the street and to relieve some of the traffic pressure at the intersection.
All right, I guess we're ready for the next one.
So in this scenario, we've got a flashing beacon with two guards. One point of distinction is that a flashing beacon does not make cars do anything. It's not like the hawk, or it's not like a traffic signal where you have a red light that says you have to stop. All it does is alert motorists that you are in the crossing area, and very often they have a pedestrian push or a push button. So in order to use, again, cross exactly as you would with a normal crossing. If you have two guards, coordinate together, because usually as soon as you press that button, it starts flashing. So only press that button when you're ready to walk out into the street or just before you do. And again, remember, you can raise your stop paddle before you set foot out of the street, make eye contact with motorists. You can press that button and work in conjunction. If you're still out there crossing kids when the lights start flashing, that's okay. Again, it's just something to alert motorists that you're there, usually to catch their attention to stop initially. But if you feel like it's really too short a time, once again, you can contact your principal to reach out to the city to see if maybe that can be evaluated. I just learned this morning that we installed a couple of these flashing beacons in Peoria, that we had a default setting of 20 seconds. So we didn't realize how long they were flashing. In some locations that may be too long, some locations that may be too short. So again, if you feel like it's not enough time, let your principal know and they can reach out to us as appropriate to evaluate if it's still appropriate. But the main takeaway here is crossing with a flashing beacon, for all intent and purpose, it works exactly like a crosswalk without a flashing beacon. It's just that little extra notification you have at it. Did you have anything else to add for this one, Dawn?
Yeah, in Phoenix, we're down to 2 locations for schools that have these flashing devices. The one is at a 15-mile-an-hour zone for an elementary. So, you know, you operate those exactly the way you would. It would just be in addition to what you're already doing at the 15-mile-an-hour zone. So you would hit the flashers before you go into the roadway. The other location is at a high school. So the school tries to encourage the students to hit the buttons, but you know, with high schoolers, you can't get them to do much anything. So, you know, hopefully the safe ones hit the button and get the flashers going.
So the distinction here is this is a flashing beacon as opposed to a hawk or pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is a little bit more complex and is much closer to a traffic signal. So Don is going to step us through the sequence of a hawk and what a motorist sees, at the same time what you as the crossing guard or a pedestrian would see.
You ready, Don?
Yep.
All right, here we go.
So as a pedestrian, when you're waiting, you'll see the push button. You'll have the "Don't Walk" sign, and the driver's the head will be black as they're approaching. Then when it comes to when it's activated, the yellow light will be seen by the drivers, and you still have to wait as a pedestrian. And you continue to wait as the yellow light goes from flashing to solid. They're going to start slowing down. And then when it comes to a solid red for the drivers, that's when it's safe for pedestrians and the crossing guards to go out into the roadway. And you're going to get the walk signal that will let you know that it's safe to walk. You're going to continue crossing even as the red solid turns to flashing, and it'll count down, and it'll tell you when you need to get out of the roadway. And then as the red lights go away, the drivers will see the heads turn back to black, and hopefully you guys are safely across the street.
So
any thoughts about that, Brandon?
yeah, so one thing I just wanted to stress again, I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. When the walk signal comes up, remember, treat it very similar to a traffic signal. You still want to make sure traffic has stopped for you before you walk out there. You establish as the crossing guard that it's safe to cross, and then call the kids to cross once you've determined it's safe for them to do so. If you feel like you don't have enough time to do that, if it already is doing the countdown by the time you're waving the kids across, once again, reach out to your principal to see if they can contact the city, whichever city is appropriate, to see if it's possible to give a little bit more of that solid walk time before the flashing don't walk. A lot of times you probably have enough of the flashing don't walk time, because that's calculated based on a fairly slow walking speed, but it's usually that time to get established out into the crosswalk to determine everything is safe, and then to call the kids across, that you need a little bit of extra time, that you more than you would at a normal traffic signal that assumes a pedestrian sees walk and just goes immediately, because you're using up a lot more time. So that's what's different about a school crossing or a crossing, a signal crossing or a hawk crossing with a guard, as opposed to just a crossing anywhere else that the general public is using, because there's an extra time to set up that's needed at those locations sometimes.
And the other issue too at these locations is drivers don't always stop the way they're supposed to. So you can't just immediately go out into the road when you see the walk signal pop up.
Right.
You as a guard have to make sure that it's clear before you try to go out, and that may take a few seconds, and that may interrupt the time you need to get the kids across the street. So if you're finding that that's a common occurrence, you may need to get a little bit more time added just to make up for that.
So we have a question that's come in. Fred asks, can all cities have these type of signs? So I guess the clarification would be signs, or are you talking about the hawk, the pedestrian beacon? If the question is for beacon, go ahead, Don.
All cities could have them. It's just up to the jurisdiction to decide if they want to install them.
Yeah, and there's also criteria that need to be evaluated, but minimum criteria before a city should even consider this type of a treatment. Typically, they are more appropriate on higher speed, higher volume locations where you don't have the benefit of other forms of traffic control, primarily a traffic signal. But there is a lot involved with it. They are expensive, and there's a certain minimum number of crossings that there should be before a city should be considering them. If you have a location where, if you've got 200 crossings, that's kind of a higher priority location. But again, it depends on a case-by-case basis. So if you feel there's a location where you have a lot of crossings and you're having difficulty at that location, particularly on higher speed arterial streets, you could request your principal to contact the city if it could be evaluated. There's a lot involved, but at least to get that process started to look at it. And one thing I would encourage is maybe if you have concerns, to bring up the concerns rather than what the solution is, because sometimes, you know, maybe a hawk is appropriate, maybe it's not. There's actually a guide out there that's produced by the Federal Highway Administration, and there's a specific guide that pertains to Arizona that is almost a kind of a checklist of different ideas, things that cities can do to improve safety and visibility at crosswalks. And it depends on what the safety concerns are. So the one thing, so I'd say I would just encourage to bring up your concerns rather than the solutions, and see if your principal shares those concerns, and maybe the city you're working in, if they can look at some options and see if anything additional might be appropriate at your crossing. Did you have anything to add to that one, John?
No, you covered it pretty good. So I think we're done with this section.